Latsa, buina paiste a furbas a glav na Taliban agus tar smuinta la Charlie na paiste a bacht a shagus buhis le go well process shahana in our chair féin or tas agat go well alan brew are in process politul egan Shaw and Taoiseach. You'll know that the power sharing in all Ireland institutions face major economic and political challenges at this time. And the economic challenges arise from the Tory party's austerity policies, from the reduction by that government of the Executive's block grant, and the lack of financial powers needed to remodel the local economy in the north. And you'll know that the political challenges arise from the British government's refusal to honour international agreements and political unionism's resistance to power sharing and partnership. You'll also know, Taoiseach, that no party in the North's executive has a mandate to implement policies which undermine international agreements or indeed the rights and welfare of the most vulnerable in society. But last week, Taoiseach, you and the British Prime Minister tabled a paper which did just this. You put it forward on a take it or leave it basis, doesn't mention Act na Gaeilge, doesn't mention a Bill of Rights, acquiesces to the British government's use of national security to deny information for victims or to close down Article 2 compliant inquests. And this was deeply disappointing. Under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, the Irish Government has a responsibility as co-equal guarantor to uphold all aspects of this and subsequent agreements and to ensure that the British Government does likewise. Now, I know, Taoiseach, that this is a very difficult task, but can you explain why you agreed to the paper, which is so deficient that it runs against the spirit and the letter of the Good Friday Agreement and other agreements, some with international status?
Thank you.
I can. First of all, I was happy to attend at the discussions that took place in Belfast on Thursday and Friday. This was the 10th week of discussions that had begun quite some time ago. And in respect, I have to say that which the discussions from this side, led by Minister Flanagan and his colleagues, were productive and constructive and were added to by the discussions that took place both in plenary session and with the individual parties around the table. Let's be very clear on this, Deputy Adams. The position is that the particular circumstances that apply in Northern Ireland have to take into account the legacy of the conflict period. The Irish Government, time and again, not just now but in the past, have shown their interest in this through the Peace Fund and through the Interreg funds, the Reconciliation Fund operated by the Department of Foreign Affairs. But the particular circumstance also means that the Executive and the Assembly in Northern Ireland requested responsibility for taking on devolved government, and that was allocated and assigned to the Executive and to the Assembly. But the fact of the matter is that the Executive and the Assembly has not been able to agree on how that should be done. And the reason that I had the privilege of attending there with all of the members, including the British Prime Minister, was to continue to offer our support and assistance where that were possible. But you know this. You are the leader of your party, or the president of your party, and according to political commentary, everything has to pass through you. But social security, child supports and pensions are devolved in Northern Ireland. And Section 87 of the Northern Ireland Act of 1998 requires the Secretary of State with responsibility for social security and the equivalent Northern Ireland Minister to consult each other to secure a single system of social security, child support and pensions within the United Kingdom. And the statement of funding principle makes it clear that the funding for the social security system is demand-led and comes from the Treasury. So it's a matter for the parties in Northern Ireland who have had this responsibility devolved to them to make that political decision. And they haven't been able to make that. And you know that if the Assembly and the Executive do not make that decision, then the shortfall comes from the block grant. And the case being made last week was for further monies from the taxpayer in order to deal with this particular matter. But that's a denial of the responsibility for which the Executive and the Assembly demanded and have been given. And it seems to me as if the majority of parties in Northern Ireland want to get on with the business here. But it's also clear that you have made a particular case here as to why this should not be so. So from a political point of view, responsibility was sought, responsibility was devolved, responsibility is not being accepted. And from that point of view, the government here will continue to be supportive in the way we have been, and that amounts to a substantial amount over the next number of years. But the British government, in putting their cards on the table, have left aside almost a billion in extra spending power available to the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly for dispersal throughout the North, provided that the political agreement is put in place on the papers that were there. I made a specific issue of the Irish language, and as you know, the paper presented in Belfast included a particular paragraph on that, Deputy Adams.
Deputy Adams, 1 minute.
The paragraph said that the Minister can bring forward a paper to the Executive. It doesn't mention Act na Gaeilge, which is a commitment made at the St Andrews Agreement by both governments. I asked you a very straightforward question. Why did you, Taoiseach, sign up to a paper which doesn't mention Act na Gaeilge, which doesn't mention a Bill of Rights, and which acquiesces to the British government on the use of British national security interests, and which also seeks to close down Article 2 compliant inquests? The British government made no offer of £1 billion. What the British government didn't include, and you're not a passive spectator here, you are the Taoiseach, you're a player, you're not a junior partner. What the outstanding commitments, which were not, and this is on your watch, Taoiseach, a civic forum in the North doesn't exist. An All-Ireland Civic Forum doesn't exist. A Bill of Rights doesn't exist. An All-Ireland Charter of Rights doesn't exist. A joint North-South Committee of the two Human Rights Commissions doesn't exist. Compliance with the European Charter for regional or minority languages doesn't exist. And an Irish Language Act doesn't exist. Now, it's my view that the current talks can't succeed. It's my view that a deal can be done, and the Sinn Féin team is there to do that, but cannot be on a purely British or Unionist agenda. Irish national interests have to be upheld, and that, Taoiseach, is your responsibility. These propositions were hard won over many years. And the government here cannot be allowed to acquiesce or to dilute these. I mean, in my presence, in your presence, the British Prime Minister told me that he would not be establishing an inquiry into the killing of human rights lawyer Pat Finucane, as he's obliged to do under the Weston Park Agreement. Taoiseach, you sat silently. Not one word did you utter on that issue. And it's very clear that this government in London still tries to obstruct efforts to get to the justice and truth that victims of the conflict are looking for. So my question was, why did you sign up to this agenda? And I make the point again. A deal can be done. A deal will have to be done. How do you, Taoiseach, explain how you intend to be part of this as opposed to a spectator or a commentator on what happened?
Well, as usual, you're very economical with the truth. The fact of the matter is that you, as the leader of your party, have put your foot down and said we will not have welfare reform in Northern Ireland. Welfare reform. The fact of the matter is that social security arrangements are a devolved power. You sought that and you got it. But nonetheless, the costs are borne by the Treasury in London. And are separate from the other funding stream of the block grant, and Northern Ireland has no power to act autonomously here. So if you have a shortfall, it comes out of the block grant, and that will be 13 million between January and March of this year, 87 million next year, and 114 million between 2015 and 2016. Now, the fact of the matter is, Deputy Adams, that there was a separate piece of legislation dealing with the introduction of welfare reform in Northern Ireland. It got a as far as its second reading, it's committee stage and it has not progressed beyond that since 2013. And you put a stop to that. You asked for the power for devolved responsibility, but you won't accept it. You will not. You are afraid to make decisions about welfare reform. Now you asked me why we signed up to this. The paper presented, in which I had a central part to play from the Irish government's point of view, did include a direct and specific passage about the Irish language and about Scots Gaelic, Scots Irish and so on, and we made that point very clearly. But I think, Deputy Adams, that in respect of the Historic Investigative Unit, that there is significant movement here which will allow for the chairperson of that, when appointed by both governments, to receive even the most sensitive documentation from the British government and from agencies of the British government, which includes issues like Ballymurphy, and which will include, in my view, other elements of what might not have been produced in De Silva in respect of Finucane. And we could be still in Northern Ireland going round in circles and not making a decision. Because the fundamental issue is that the Executive and the Assembly sought responsibility for devolved authority, and they got it in respect of welfare reform, in respect of pensions and child support. But you are afraid to face the music and make a choice in respect of welfare reform. So you're putting off the long day here. And what happened then was that the Irish government will continue to support Northern Ireland as we have done. That will amount to about $500 million over the next number of years. And the British Prime Minister, in his discussions which he conducted himself with both the First and Deputy First Minister, because this is a matter of devolved responsibility, said, I'm giving you extra capacity to have access to spending power of almost €1 billion. And you said that this was ham-fisted and amateurish and was the worst kind of discussions you were involved in all your years. Well, I'll say this to you. You know, if we put together a political paper upon which agreement can be reached, if you have the courage to face it down, Deputy Adams, on which it can be reached, and secondly, if you have both governments in Belfast for the purpose of signing off on an agreement which will give extra spending power to the Executive Assembly in Northern Ireland, I don't think that's either amateurish or ham-fisted. And you should have the courage now to face up to your political responsibility and do what you have to do, or else say to your Deputy First Minister, your Deputy First Minister, Martin, you have responsibility for this. He wants to do a deal, but you won't let him. And it's a big sign of what you might have down here if the people were ever to give you that kind of responsibility in this country.
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
You wanted to bring in one of your budgets.
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, please.